My name is Geraldine Turner, 32 years old, and until recently, a senior project manager at TechVision Solutions. I was great at my job, respected by my team, and delivered consistent results. None of that mattered when Maxwell decided I was a threat. He claimed headcount was a privilege, not a right, but never imagined his revenge firing would cost the company millions. Let me tell you how I turned his attempt to destroy my career into his biggest mistake. If you are watching this video, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more workplace justice stories. I joined TechVision Solutions 4 years ago after building my reputation at 2 smaller tech firms. With my MBA from Northwestern and experience managing complex software implementations, I was excited about the opportunity to work with bigger clients and larger budgets. The company had been growing rapidly, expanding from a startup of 20 people to over 200 employees in just 6 years. When I first met Maxwell Parker, my soon-to-be boss and the vice president of project management, he seemed impressed with my background. During the interview, he nodded approvingly as I described how I had saved my previous company $300,000 by streamlining their implementation process. He asked thoughtful questions about my management style and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas for improving client satisfaction ratings. "We need someone who can handle our biggest clients without hand-holding," he told me. "Based on your track record, you might be exactly what we need." I was thrilled when they offered me the position with a salary that exceeded my expectations. The onboarding process was smooth, and I quickly connected with my new colleagues, particularly Amanda Reyes in Human Resources. Amanda had been with TechVision since the early days and knew everyone and everything about how the company operated. "You made quite an impression," Amanda told me during my first week. "Maxwell rarely approves hiring senior managers from outside his network." My team consisted of 5 project coordinators, each managing different aspects of our client implementations. Jessica Thompson became my closest ally on the team, a detail-oriented coordinator who appreciated my organized approach and clear communication style. In those early days, I also had several interactions with Richard Donovan, our chief financial officer. Unlike many finance executives I had worked with, Richard valued project managers who understood the financial implications of their decisions. During my second month, he praised my detailed budget projections for a major healthcare client implementation. "This is exactly the level of financial awareness we need from the project team," Richard told Maxwell during a leadership meeting. "Geraldine clearly understands how project decisions impact our bottom line." I noticed a slight tightening around Maxwell's eyes at the compliment, but thought nothing of it at the time. The CEO, Bradley Wilson, remained a more distant figure during my first year. He occasionally stopped by our department meetings, but seemed to trust his executive team to handle day-to-day operations. His focus remained on company growth and courting new investors. My early months at TechVision were remarkably successful. I took over management of our largest account, a financial services company that had been expressing frustration with our implementation timeline. By restructuring the project plan and adding key checkpoints with the client, I turned their experience around completely. The client contact personally emailed Bradley to express how pleased they were with the changes. Maxwell congratulated me publicly, but later questioned why I had altered the project methodology without consulting him first. When I explained that I had followed the escalation procedures outlined in our department handbook, he dismissed my explanation. "The handbook is a guideline, not a substitute for judgment," he said curtly. "In the future, run significant changes by me first." I agreed to do so, but this conversation marked the first indication that Maxwell might have a different management style than what he had presented during my interviews. As time went on, I began to learn more about Maxwell's background from conversations with longer-tenured colleagues. He had been one of the first 10 employees at TechVision, joining when the company was still operating out of the founder's garage. While he had extensive knowledge of their products, his management experience came entirely from growing within this single company. Jessica confided in me during a lunch break that Maxwell had been passed over for the Chief Operations Officer position the previous year, despite lobbying heavily for the role. Instead, Bradley had hired an experienced operations executive from outside the company. "He took it pretty hard," Jessica explained. "Since then, he has been really sensitive about his territory and authority." This information helped contextualize some of Maxwell's behaviors that had begun to emerge. He required extensive documentation for decisions that should have been routine. He questioned my approaches in ways that seemed designed to undermine rather than improve, and increasingly he spoke over me in meetings with senior leadership. Despite these growing tensions, my work continued to speak for itself. My client satisfaction scores were the highest in the department. My team maintained better than average retention rates, and our projects consistently came in on or under budget. I genuinely enjoyed working with my team and took pride in mentoring my project coordinators to advance their skills. Amanda advised me to keep detailed records of my accomplishments and all communications with Maxwell. It never hurts to document everything she said with a meaningful look that I did not fully understand at the time. I continued to approach my role with professionalism and enthusiasm, hoping that consistent results would overcome whatever reservations Maxwell seemed to be developing. I was still optimistic that we could develop a productive working relationship based on mutual respect for each other's strengths. Looking back now, I realize how naive that hope truly was. The first unmistakable sign that something had fundamentally changed came 6 months after I received a company-wide excellence award for the successful implementation of our new healthcare platform. During the quarterly planning meeting, I noticed my name had been removed from the attendee list. When I inquired about the omission, Maxwell responded with a thin smile. "We are streamlining the meeting. Too many voices make strategic planning inefficient," he explained. "I will represent our department priorities." The following week, I was copied on an email chain where Maxwell presented his new methodology for client onboarding to the executive team. The approach he described was identical to the process I had developed and documented 3 months earlier, which had already shown a 20% improvement in client satisfaction during the crucial first 30 days. When I privately mentioned this to Maxwell, he dismissed my concern. All department improvements belong to department leadership. Individual credit creates the wrong incentives in a team environment. Confused by this sudden change in attitude, I sought insight from Amanda during our monthly lunch. "He presented your 6 Sigma process improvement as his own during the executive retreat last month too," she revealed. Bradley was quite impressed with his innovation. I began noticing other troubling patterns. My direct reports were being invited to meetings with Maxwell without my knowledge. Project details were changing without my input. Critical client emails were being redirected to Maxwell's inbox rather than following our established communication protocols. Determined to address these issues professionally, I requested a private meeting with Maxwell. We met over coffee at a nearby cafe, away from the office politics. "I value our department's success above everything. I began carefully, but lately I feel there might be some miscommunication about roles and responsibilities. I want to make sure we are aligned." Maxwell sipped his Americano slowly before responding. "I appreciate your proactive approach, Geraldine. Perhaps I have been remiss in providing clear direction." His tone was conciliatory, but his eyes remained cold. "Why don't you draft a document outlining your understanding of your role, and we can use that as a starting point for alignment?" I spent the weekend crafting a thoughtful, detailed document describing my responsibilities based on my job description and performance expectations from previous reviews. I included specific examples of successful initiatives and areas where I hoped to contribute further. Maxwell never acknowledged receiving the document. Instead, the following week, he assigned me to manage a troubled project for a notoriously difficult client. The implementation was already 2 months behind schedule. The client was threatening to cancel their contract, and the previous project manager had quit abruptly, leaving minimal documentation. "This needs your special touch," Maxwell announced in our team meeting. "I need this fixed in 30 days or we risk losing a $2 million account." What he failed to mention was that the project was understaffed by at least 3 positions. Critical, technical resources had been reassigned to other priorities, and the client had repeatedly changed requirements without adjusting timelines. I dove into the challenge despite these obstacles, working 12-hour days and weekends to understand the project's history and develop a recovery plan. I personally called the client to reset expectations and rebuilt the project schedule from scratch. I documented every issue, decision, and risk meticulously. Through sheer determination, and by calling in favors from colleagues in other departments, I managed to get the project back on track. The client, initially skeptical, became increasingly confident in our new approach. Instead of recognition, Maxwell questioned my methods during department meetings. "Are we certain these aggressive timelines are achievable?" he would ask, despite my detailed analysis supporting each milestone. I worry we are overpromising to compensate for past failures. The undermining became more overt. He began excluding me from client calls I had scheduled. He edited my status reports before they went to senior leadership, adding caveats and concerns that had never been raised with me directly. My anxiety began affecting my sleep. I found myself checking email, constantly worried about what might be happening without my knowledge. The stress manifested physically, too, with tension headaches becoming a regular occurrence. Jessica noticed the change in dynamics and offered her support. "We all see what is happening," she confided during a rare coffee break. "He did something similar to Robert last year before he was pushed out." This revelation sent a chill through me. Robert had been a highly regarded director who had suddenly departed for personal reasons, according to the official announcement. I consulted with Amanda again, who confirmed my growing suspicion. "Maxwell tends to view strong performers as threats, rather than assets," she explained carefully. "Especially women who receive recognition from upper management." "Is my position at risk?" I asked directly. Amanda hesitated before answering. "I should not be telling you this, but there has been talk about restructuring your team. Maxwell has been discussing the possibility of flattening the organization chart with fewer middle managers." That evening, I logged into our project management system to check on some deadlines and discovered something disturbing. My name had been removed from the organizational chart in the pending system update scheduled for the following month. In my place was a dotted line connecting my team directly to Maxwell. 3 days after discovering my removal from the organizational chart, I received a calendar invitation titled "Performance Discussion with Maxwell and Stephanie" from HR, whom I barely knew, despite Amanda being my usual HR contact. The meeting was scheduled for 8 in the morning the following day, an unusually early time for our office culture. I immediately texted Amanda, "Performance meeting tomorrow with Maxwell and Stephanie. Not you. Red flag." Her response came quickly. "Major red flag. Stephanie handles terminations and PIPs. Call me tonight." That evening, Amanda explained that Maxwell had specifically requested Stephanie rather than her for this meeting. "He knows we have a friendly relationship. This is by design, Geraldine." I spent the night reviewing my performance metrics and project statuses. Everything was documented, showing consistent achievement or overachievement of objectives. I had saved copies of all communications and recognition I had received. I arrived early, professionally dressed, and outwardly calm despite my racing heart. Maxwell and Stephanie were already waiting in the small conference room. The atmosphere was immediately tense. Maxwell did not make eye contact as I entered, busying himself with papers in front of him. "Geraldine, thank you for joining us." Stephanie began with practiced neutrality. "Maxwell has some concerns about your recent performance that he would like to address." Maxwell finally looked up, his expression severe. "I have been monitoring your work closely over the past quarter, and I am not seeing the leadership qualities this role requires." What followed was 45 minutes of vague criticisms and mischaracterizations of situations I had successfully navigated. He claimed my client communication was causing confusion despite improved satisfaction scores. He suggested my team felt micromanaged, though retention and engagement metrics indicated the opposite. When I attempted to respond with specific data contradicting his assertions, Maxwell interrupted. "Headcount is a privilege, not a right," he declared loudly, slapping his palm on the table. "Everyone in this organization must continuously justify their position. Today, I am not convinced you are justifying yours." I maintained my composure, asking for specific examples and clarification on each point. "Could you please help me understand which specific performance metrics I am not meeting? My understanding was that client satisfaction, project profitability, and team retention were my primary success measures, and all 3 are trending positively." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "This is exactly the problem. You are focusing on metrics rather than the intangibles of leadership. Your approach is too rigid and process-oriented." Stephanie interjected at this point. "Based on these concerns, we believe it is appropriate to place you on a performance improvement plan effective immediately." She slid a document across the table that outlined a 90-day plan with objectives that seemed deliberately designed to be unattainable. The goals included items outside my control, such as improve cross-departmental collaboration scores by 40% when I had been systematically excluded from interdepartmental meetings. "I will need time to review this document thoroughly," I stated, maintaining a professional tone. "You have 24 hours to sign it," Maxwell replied. "Otherwise, we will need to consider whether you are committed to improvement." That afternoon, I met secretly with Amanda in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. After reviewing the PIP, she confirmed my suspicions. "This is not a genuine improvement plan," she said quietly. "This is documentation for termination. The goals are not achievable by design." "So I am being set up to fail," I stated flatly. "Yes, and Maxwell has done this before." That night, I could not sleep. My career at TechVision, which had started so promisingly, was being systematically dismantled. I had student loans, a mortgage, and my mother's medical bills to consider. The job market was tight, and a termination for performance issues would make finding a comparable position difficult. Instead of panicking, I turned to what I did best: research and planning. I spent hours reviewing the company handbook, particularly the sections on termination and severance. During my search, I discovered something interesting: a recently updated severance policy that seemed to have been modified within the past month. According to the revised policy, employees terminated due to workforce reductions or organizational restructuring qualified for severance packages based on their years of service and salary level. For senior managers with more than 3 years of service, the severance could equal up to 12 months of compensation if the termination was not performance-related. I also researched employment law in our state, learning about the distinction between termination for cause versus elimination of position. The difference was significant both for unemployment benefits and potential severance. The next morning, I signed the PIP without argument. Maxwell seemed almost disappointed by my acquiescence, perhaps expecting resistance he could document as insubordination. Instead, I thanked him for the opportunity to improve and assured him I would follow the plan diligently. Over the next weeks, I documented everything obsessively. Every email, meeting, and decision was saved and categorized. I kept a detailed journal of daily activities and achievements. I recorded metrics on all aspects of my performance that could be quantified. Most importantly, I excelled at every measurable aspect of my job. I worked longer hours than ever, ensuring my team continued to deliver exceptional results despite the increasingly hostile environment. I was unfailingly professional in all interactions, giving Maxwell no legitimate cause for complaint. I also began quietly building relationships with executives outside our department, particularly Richard in finance. When the opportunity arose during a company event, I discussed some cost-saving measures I had implemented on my troubled project, which had ultimately preserved the profit margin despite the earlier setbacks. Richard was impressed. "That is the kind of financial thinking we need more of around here. Have you considered taking on more financial analysis in your role?" "I would welcome that opportunity," I replied, "though currently my focus is on meeting the objectives in my performance improvement plan." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Performance improvement plan. With your track record." That brief exchange confirmed that Maxwell had not shared his actions with his peers on the executive team, perhaps knowing they might question his motives. As the PIP period progressed, Maxwell became increasingly frustrated by my refusal to fail or quit. He began adding new, even more challenging requirements. "Your weekly status reports need more strategic insight," he would say, without specifying what that meant. Or, "Your team does not seem sufficiently motivated, despite all evidence to the contrary." I met each new challenge, methodically documenting everything and sending weekly progress reports, not just to Maxwell and Stephanie, but also copying Richard and the required distribution list for all PIPs. My reports were detailed, data-driven, and highlighted both achievements and constructive approaches to challenges. 2 weeks before the 90-day review that would determine my fate, Maxwell moved up the date due to scheduling conflicts. I knew then that his decision was already made, regardless of my performance. Amanda confirmed my suspicion during a hurried conversation in the parking garage. "He has already drafted the termination paperwork. Stephanie has it on her desk for tomorrow." That night, I finalized my own preparations. I reviewed all documentation once more and organized it for easy reference. I prepared a professional, non-confrontational response to the termination I knew was coming, and I ensured I understood exactly how the severance policy applied to different termination scenarios. I slept surprisingly well, knowing I had done everything possible to protect myself. The next morning, I dressed in my most professional outfit and walked confidently into Maxwell's office for what we both knew would be our final meeting. The air in Maxwell's office felt charged with tension as I took my seat across from him and Stephanie. A folder labeled confidential sat ominously on the desk between us. Maxwell's expression betrayed a hint of satisfaction that he quickly masked with a serious businesslike demeanor. "Thank you for joining us, Geraldine," he began with feigned regret in his voice. "We have been closely monitoring your performance throughout this improvement period, and unfortunately, we have not seen the progress necessary for you to continue in this role." Stephanie slid the folder toward me. "We have prepared the necessary documentation regarding your separation from the company." I maintained a calm exterior despite the rush of emotions internally. This moment, while expected, still carried the sting of injustice. However, I had prepared meticulously for exactly this scenario, and my response would be critical. "Before we proceed," I said evenly, "may I ask a few clarifying questions about the nature of this termination? I want to ensure I understand the company's position correctly." Maxwell seemed slightly thrown by my composure but nodded curtly. "Is this termination based on failure to meet the specific metrics outlined in my performance improvement plan, or is it related to the organizational restructuring mentioned in the updated organizational chart?" I asked, referencing the chart I had discovered weeks earlier. Maxwell and Stephanie exchanged a quick glance. This was clearly not the reaction they had anticipated. "Well," Maxwell began, seemingly choosing his words carefully, "while your performance has been a concern, this decision ultimately aligns with our departmental restructuring efforts. As I have always maintained, headcount is a privilege that must be continuously justified through exceptional performance and alignment with company direction." I nodded thoughtfully, making sure my next question was precisely worded. "So, to be clear for the official record, this is a workforce reduction decision rather than a for-cause termination based on performance deficiencies." Maxwell, eager to avoid any suggestion that his assessment of my performance might be challenged, took the bait. "Yes, this is a reduction in force decision. As I said, headcount is a privilege, and we are streamlining the department structure." I noticed Stephanie shifting uncomfortably in her seat, but she remained silent as Maxwell continued. "Your position is being eliminated as part of our effort to flatten the organization and improve direct communication between leadership and project coordinators." "Thank you for that clarification," I replied, careful to keep any hint of triumph from my voice. "That helps me understand the situation better." I then reviewed the termination paperwork carefully, noting that the official reason listed was indeed elimination of position rather than performance issues. This critical distinction was exactly what I had hoped for. "I see that my final day will be today, and I am to transfer my projects and responsibilities to you directly," I noted, reviewing the transition plan. "I am prepared to do that professionally to ensure minimal disruption for our clients and team." Maxwell seemed relieved by my cooperative attitude, perhaps expecting tears or protests that would have given him the upper hand. Instead, my composed acceptance appeared to unsettle him slightly. "Yes, we appreciate your professionalism during this transition," he said, regaining his confidence. "We will provide you with 2 weeks of severance as a courtesy, though it is not required given the circumstances." I simply nodded and signed the termination documents without argument, making sure the reason for separation remained elimination of position and departmental restructuring throughout all paperwork. As the meeting concluded, I asked one final question. "Will the standard exit process be followed regarding my departure announcement and offboarding procedures?" "Yes, company policy will be followed," Stephanie confirmed, seeming relieved that the meeting had gone smoothly. I spent the remainder of the day transferring my projects, sending detailed status updates, and cleaning out my desk. I said appropriate goodbyes to my team, promising to keep in touch through LinkedIn, without revealing the true nature of my departure. Jessica hugged me tightly, whispering, "This is so wrong," in my ear. As I walked out of TechVision's glass doors for what I thought might be the final time, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The injustice of the situation still stung sharply, but beneath that pain was a sense of quiet confidence. Maxwell had just made a critical error, and he did not even realize it. That evening, Amanda called me. "I cannot believe Maxwell was that careless," she said, amazement evident in her voice. "He practically handed you the exact documentation you needed." "He was so focused on getting rid of me that he did not think through the implications of how he classified the termination," I replied. "The revised severance policy explicitly states that employees whose positions are eliminated due to restructuring are entitled to severance equal to their annual salary if they have been with the company for 3 years or more, Amanda explained. Maxwell apparently never bothered to read the policy update from last quarter. I had already begun preparing my formal request for severance based on the policy. The termination paperwork clearly states my position was eliminated as part of departmental restructuring, not for performance reasons, I noted. And I hit my 4-year mark last month. Submit your claim first thing tomorrow, Amanda advised. HR is required to process it according to written policy regardless of what Maxwell intended. The following morning, I submitted my formal severance claim through the company's online portal, attaching the signed termination documents that clearly stated position elimination as the reason for separation. I then waited, knowing that the wheels of corporate bureaucracy would now begin turning in my favor. 3 days later, I received a call from Stephanie. Her voice sounded strained. Geraldine, we have received your severance request and need to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss some questions that have arisen. I am happy to clarify anything needed, I replied calmly. The documentation should be straightforward based on the company policy and the nature of my separation, as documented in the termination papers. The meeting was scheduled for the following day with Stephanie, and surprisingly, Richard from finance. Maxwell was conspicuously absent. When I arrived, Richard greeted me with a concerned expression. Geraldine, thank you for coming in. We are reviewing your severance claim and have some questions about the circumstances of your departure. I presented my case clearly, and without emotion, referencing the specific policy language and the documentation provided during my termination. Richard reviewed everything carefully, occasionally glancing at Stephanie with a questioning expression. According to our records and the documentation provided, I explained my position was eliminated as part of departmental restructuring, which, according to the current severance policy, qualifies me for severance equal to 1 year's salary based on my 4 years of service. Richard frowned. This is a substantial amount. Was Maxwell aware of this policy implication when he processed your termination? I cannot speak to what Maxwell knew or did not know, I replied diplomatically. I can only reference the official documentation and company policy. After a thorough review of all documents, Richard sighed deeply. Everything appears to be in order from a policy perspective. Your claim is valid based on the classification of your termination and our current policy. Stephanie looked uncomfortable but nodded in agreement. The paperwork clearly indicates position elimination, rather than performance issues. As I left that meeting, I knew that Maxwell's attempt to remove me had backfired spectacularly, though the full extent of the consequences had yet to unfold. 1 week after my meeting with Richard and Stephanie, I received an official letter confirming approval of my severance claim. The document outlined the full amount equal to my annual salary of $135,000 to be paid in a lump sum, minus applicable taxes. Payment would be processed within 30 days, according to standard procedure. I forwarded a copy of the approval to my personal email for safekeeping, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. This outcome would provide financial stability while I searched for a new position without the stigma of a performance-based termination on my record. What I did not anticipate was the phone call I received from Maxwell 2 days later. Geraldine, we need to discuss your severance claim, he began, without preamble, his voice tight with barely contained anger. The claim has already been approved based on company policy, I replied calmly. Is there something specific you would like to discuss? This is clearly a misunderstanding, he continued, his tone sharpening. Your separation was performance-related, not a position elimination. I need you to withdraw your claim immediately. I am sorry, but the official termination documents you and Stephanie provided clearly state that my position was eliminated due to departmental restructuring, I responded. All paperwork consistently reflects this classification, which you confirmed verbally during our final meeting. Maxwell's frustration was audible as he retorted. That was a courtesy to help you save face. The reality is that your performance was inadequate. If that were the case, it should have been documented as such in the termination paperwork, I pointed out. All official documentation indicates position elimination, not performance issues. After a tense silence, Maxwell's voice took on a threatening edge. This could become a legal matter if you persist with this misrepresentation. I'm simply following the process based on the documentation provided by TechVision, I stated firmly. If you feel there has been a misrepresentation, that would need to be addressed through proper channels with HR and legal. The call ended abruptly with Maxwell hanging up, leaving me shaken but resolute. I immediately documented the conversation in detail and emailed it to myself for my records. The following day, Amanda called me. "Maxwell is on the warpath," she warned. "He is trying to get your severance claim reversed, claiming administrative error in the termination classification." "Can he do that after the fact?" I asked, concerned. "Not easily," Amanda assured me. "The documentation is clear, and Richard has already approved the payout from a financial perspective. More importantly, Maxwell does not realize that yours is not the only case." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You are the third senior manager this year whose position was eliminated shortly after receiving recognition from upper management," Amanda explained. "All three cases followed the same pattern, and all three qualify for the enhanced severance under the current policy. The total liability to the company is approaching $3 million. This revelation stunned me. Maxwell had been systematically removing people he perceived as threats, but had carelessly used the same position, elimination, classification for all of them, triggering substantial severance obligations that he apparently never anticipated. Meanwhile, at TechVision, the quarterly executive review was approaching. According to Amanda, financial liabilities were always a major focus of these meetings, with Richard presenting detailed analyses of unexpected expenses and their impact on quarterly results. 2 days before the executive review, I received another call, this time from Richard himself. His tone was respectful but serious. "Geraldine, I hope you are doing well. I am calling about your severance package." My heart sank, expecting bad news, but Richard continued. "I want to assure you that your claim has been processed, and payment will be issued next week as scheduled. I also want to apologize for the circumstances of your departure, which I have now reviewed in detail." Surprised by this turn, I thanked him for the update and his candor. "There is one more thing," Richard added before ending the call. "We may need to contact you in the coming weeks regarding some project documentation. Would you be open to consulting briefly if needed?" Of course, I agreed, curious about this development, but careful not to ask questions that might seem unprofessional. The day of the executive review, Amanda texted me, "Quarterly meeting today. Maxwell looks nervous." Later that evening, she called with a detailed account of what had transpired. The executives had gathered in the main conference room, with Bradley presiding over the meeting. When Richard took the floor to discuss financial matters, he displayed a slide showing a new liability of $2.8 million that had not been accounted for in the quarterly forecast. This unexpected liability represents severance obligations triggered by recent position eliminations, Richard explained to the group, according to Amanda's account. Bradley, surprised by the figure, asked for clarification. Richard then put up a slide showing the severance policy and its application to the recent terminations. Looking directly at Maxwell, Richard asked pointedly, "Who approved the policy that gives privileged employees a severance equal to their annual salary?" The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Maxwell's face reportedly drained of color as he realized his mistake was now visible to the entire executive team. These position eliminations were processed as departmental restructuring rather than performance-based separations, Richard continued. "According to our current policy, this classification triggers our enhanced severance package for qualified employees." Bradley turned to Maxwell. "Did you authorize these position eliminations without considering the financial implications?" Maxwell stammered about performance issues and administrative errors, but Richard interjected with the documentation showing that all three cases were consistently classified as position eliminations related to departmental restructuring, not performance issues. If these were actually performance-based terminations incorrectly classified, that presents a different set of concerns, Bradley noted gravely. Either way, this represents a significant failure of process and fiscal responsibility. The meeting apparently concluded with Bradley requesting a full review of all recent terminations handled by Maxwell's department, as well as an audit of his adherence to HR protocols. 2 days later, Amanda called again. "Maxwell has been placed on administrative leave pending review," she reported. "Bradley has appointed an interim leader for your former department and initiated a full investigation." The following week, I received an unexpected email from Bradley himself, requesting a confidential meeting to discuss my experience at TechVision. Similar meetings were being arranged with the other managers who had been terminated under similar circumstances. During our meeting, I presented my documentation, professionally focusing on the facts rather than emotions or accusations. Bradley listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about my project's performance metrics and interactions with Maxwell. I appreciate your professionalism throughout this difficult situation, Bradley said, as our meeting concluded. The information you have provided will be valuable in our internal review. 3 weeks later, my severance payment was deposited as promised. The financial security it provided allowed me to be selective about my next career move, interviewing with several companies without the pressure of immediate financial necessity. What I did not expect was the call I received from Jessica a month after my departure. "You would not believe what happened today," she began excitedly. "Maxwell has been terminated." According to Jessica, the investigation had revealed a pattern of retaliatory behavior and mismanagement that had cost the company not only the severance payouts but also valuable talent and institutional knowledge. The final determination had been that Maxwell's actions constituted a violation of company policies regarding fair employment practices and financial responsibility. "They are completely restructuring the department," Jessica continued, "and Richard has been asked to oversee the transition until a permanent replacement is found." While I took no pleasure in Maxwell's downfall, there was a sense of vindication in knowing that the truth had ultimately come to light. His attempt to eliminate me as a perceived threat had instead exposed his own inadequacies as a leader. I reflected on how differently things might have turned out had I not maintained my professionalism, documented everything meticulously, and understood the policies that were meant to protect employees from exactly this type of situation. My career at TechVision had ended, but I had emerged with my professional reputation intact and a financial cushion that would support my transition to a better opportunity. 2 months after my departure from TechVision, I was settling into interviews with several promising companies when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. To my surprise, it was Stephanie from HR. "Geraldine, I hope you are doing well," she began awkwardly. "I am calling because there have been some significant changes at TechVision, and we would like to discuss a potential opportunity with you." I listened with growing amazement, as Stephanie explained that following Maxwell's termination, they had conducted a thorough review of all departures over the past 18 months. The investigation had revealed that several high-performing employees had been pushed out through questionable means. "Bradley and the executive team are implementing a comprehensive restructuring of our management approach," she continued. "As part of this effort, we are reaching out to certain former employees whose departures we now recognize were unjustified." The conversation ended with an invitation to meet with Bradley and Richard the following week to discuss a potential return to TechVision in a newly created director-level position. My initial reaction was skepticism. While the vindication felt satisfying, I questioned whether returning to a company that had allowed such behavior would be wise. I consulted with Amanda, who had become a trusted friend outside of work. "The changes are genuine," she assured me. "Maxwell's departure was just the beginning. Bradley has initiated a complete overhaul of management practices and accountability structures. Richard has been instrumental in pushing for these reforms." The meeting with Bradley and Richard confirmed Amanda's assessment. They spoke candidly about the organizational failures that had permitted Maxwell's behavior to continue unchecked for so long. "We failed to recognize the pattern until the financial implications forced us to look more closely," Bradley acknowledged. "That is a system failure we are determined to correct." Richard outlined the new management framework being implemented, which included regular performance reviews with multiple inputs, transparent promotion criteria, and structured channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. The position they offered would place me at a level above my previous role with expanded responsibilities and a substantial increase in compensation. They also offered a signing bonus equal to 20% of my annual salary as acknowledgement of the unnecessary hardship I had experienced. While the offer was tempting, I had already advanced in discussions with another company whose values and culture seemed particularly aligned with my own professional philosophy. After careful consideration, I declined TechVision's offer with sincere appreciation for the acknowledgement. "I am genuinely grateful for the recognition and the opportunity," I told Bradley. "However, I believe my professional journey is taking me in a new direction that I need to explore." Bradley accepted my decision with grace. "I understand completely, though I am disappointed. Please know that you would be welcome back at TechVision in the future should circumstances change." What I found most interesting was the broader impact of Maxwell's actions and subsequent removal. Through ongoing conversations with Amanda and Jessica, I learned that my case had triggered a much larger examination of workplace culture throughout the company. The executive team had brought in outside consultants to assess management practices and recommend improvements. New training programs were being implemented for all supervisors with a focus on inclusive leadership and ethical decision-making. The HR department was being restructured to provide better oversight and support for employees facing workplace issues. Perhaps most significantly, the two other managers who had been terminated under similar circumstances were also contacted with offers to return. One accepted a position in a different department, while the other had already found new employment, but received a settlement acknowledgement of the mishandling of their departure. The financial impact on TechVision extended beyond the initial severance payments. The consultants' new training programs and settlements represented a substantial investment in organizational reform. According to Amanda, the total cost associated with rectifying Maxwell's management failures and their systemic causes exceeded $5 million, not counting the loss of productivity and institutional knowledge. 4 months after my departure, I accepted a position as Senior Director of Implementation Services at Horizon Technologies, a growing competitor to TechVision with a strong reputation for ethical leadership and employee development. My first project would involve building a new implementation methodology from the ground up, allowing me to apply all the lessons I had learned throughout my career, including those from my TechVision experience. During my final conversation with Amanda before starting my new position, she shared one last piece of information that brought the story full circle. The severance policy that Maxwell triggered has been revised, she told me. Not to reduce benefits, but to ensure proper classification of terminations and to add additional safeguards against retaliatory actions. They are calling it the Accountability Amendment, internally, though your name is not officially attached to it. I could not help but smile at the irony. Maxwell's attempt to remove perceived threats through misuse of company policies had not only backfired on him personally, but had ultimately strengthened protections for all employees. Sometimes justice works in unexpected ways. As I prepared for my first day at Horizon Technologies, I reflected on how different my career path had turned out from what I had envisioned when joining TechVision 4 years earlier. The challenges had been painful but had ultimately led to growth and opportunity I might otherwise never have experienced. Maxwell's $2.8 million mistake had cost him his career at TechVision, but it had also freed me to find a workplace where my contributions would be valued rather than feared. In the end, his attempt to eliminate me as a perceived threat had been the catalyst for positive change, both for me personally and for the colleagues who remained at TechVision. 6 months into my new role at Horizon Technologies, I had successfully built a high-performing implementation team and developed a methodology that reduced client onboarding time by 30%. My team was thriving, morale was high, and I had already received recognition from our CEO for exceeding quarterly targets. On a crisp autumn morning, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Richard, who had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer at TechVision following their restructuring. "Congratulations on your success at Horizon," his message began. "I have been following your career updates with interest. Would you be available for coffee next week? There are some developments at TechVision I thought you might find interesting." We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our respective offices. Richard looked more relaxed than I had ever seen him during my time at TechVision. "The changes we implemented after your departure have transformed the company culture," he explained. "Employee satisfaction scores are up 23%, and turnover has decreased significantly, especially among our top performers." He shared that Maxwell had been unable to secure another executive position in the industry. Apparently, word of his management style had spread through professional networks. "The last I heard, he was working as an independent consultant, though not very successfully," Richard added. "His reputation has followed him." While I took no pleasure in Maxwell's continued difficulties, there was a certain poetic justice in knowing that his actions had ultimately impacted his own career far more severely than mine. Richard also updated me on Jessica, who had been promoted to fill my former role and was excelling. Amanda had been given expanded responsibilities in HR, focusing specifically on employee advocacy and management accountability. "Your situation was a wake-up call for all of us in leadership," Richard admitted. "It exposed blind spots in our oversight and forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we had allowed personality-based management to override merit and results." As I walked back to my office after our meeting, I reflected on the journey of the past year and the valuable lessons it had taught me. First and foremost, I learned the crucial importance of documentation. By maintaining meticulous records of all communications, decisions, and achievements, I had protected myself when facing unjust treatment. This practice had become a cornerstone of my professional approach, even in my new supportive environment. Second, I recognized the value of understanding company policies and legal protections. Knowledge truly is power, especially when navigating difficult workplace situations. Maxwell's lack of attention to policy details had been his downfall, while my careful research had been my salvation. Third, I came to appreciate the difference between being respected and being liked. Throughout my ordeal, I had maintained professionalism and focus on results rather than seeking approval or avoiding conflict. This approach had earned me the genuine respect of colleagues like Richard, Amanda, and Jessica, whose support proved invaluable. Fourth, I learned to recognize the early warning signs of toxic leadership, taking credit for others' work, excluding team members from critical communications, providing vague or shifting feedback, and being threatened, rather than encouraged by team members' success. These insights now helped me create a healthier environment for my own team. Perhaps most importantly, I gained a deeper understanding of my own resilience. Facing unjust treatment and career uncertainty had been incredibly stressful, yet I had navigated the situation with dignity and ultimately emerged stronger. This experience had given me confidence that I could handle whatever professional challenges might arise in the future. I also came to recognize that sometimes what seems like the worst moment professionally can actually be a disguised opportunity. Had Maxwell not forced my departure, I might have remained in a toxic environment, indefinitely missing the chance to grow in my new role at Horizon. My experience had broader impacts beyond my personal journey. Through conversations with Richard, I learned that TechVision had completely revamped their management evaluation process now, including assessments from both supervisors and team members. They had implemented regular skip-level meetings where employees could speak directly with their manager's supervisor about concerns. Most significantly, they had created a structured review process for all termination decisions to ensure they were based on legitimate business needs or documented performance issues rather than personal conflicts. In my new position, I was able to implement positive leadership practices from the beginning, creating a team culture based on transparency, recognition of contributions, and mutual support. I made a point of mentoring team members who showed promise rather than viewing them as potential threats. 1 year to the day, after my termination from TechVision, I received an email from Bradley, their CEO. As we approached the anniversary of events that triggered significant changes in our organization, I wanted to reach out personally to thank you, he wrote. Your handling of a difficult situation ultimately led to meaningful reforms that have strengthened TechVision as a whole. While I regret that these changes came at your expense, I am grateful for the professionalism you demonstrated throughout, which allowed us to learn and grow from the experience. Reading his message brought a sense of closure that I had not realized I still needed. The injustice I had experienced had been fully acknowledged by the highest level of leadership, and positive change had resulted not just for me, but for all employees at TechVision. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset and reflecting on how differently things had turned out from what I had feared during those dark days after my termination. I had not only survived, but thrived. My career had advanced, my professional reputation remained intact, and I had gained wisdom that continued to inform my leadership approach. The experience had taught me that workplace justice does not always come immediately or in the form we expect. Sometimes it requires patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment to one's own professional standards. Maxwell's attempt to eliminate me as a perceived threat had ultimately been a $2.8 million mistake that cost him his career, while opening new doors for mine. As I look to the future, I carry these lessons with me. Document everything, know your rights, maintain your professionalism, build genuine relationships across your organization, and never compromise your integrity, even when facing injustice. These principles have become the foundation of my professional philosophy and the values I strive to instill in my team. I wonder how many of you have faced similar challenges in your own careers. Have you encountered leaders who felt threatened by your success? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn from the experience? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If you found value in my experience, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with others who might benefit from these lessons. Remember, sometimes, our greatest professional challenges can become our most valuable learning opportunities. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you strength and wisdom in navigating your own career path.